It's Big Money D, assets only, no liabilities.
The S&P 500 is just the largest 500 companies in the United States that trade on the stock market. So if you are a company and you are one of the biggest 500 companies on the stock market, well then you are gonna fall into the S&P 500. So this is literally just an index or a group of the biggest 500 companies on the stock market. A couple ETFs that will give you exposure to the S&P 500 are VOO and SPY. Small disclaimer, I do own shares of VOO. Now what you need to understand about this is when you go out and you buy shares of VOO or SPY on the stock market, this is now an ETF. So when you buy either one of these, you're getting exposure to the 500 largest companies on the stock market. Now you don't have to go out and individually buy each company. These ETFs are out buying these 500 largest companies and they're managing that investment for you. So all you have to do is invest your money into here or here, and now you have exposure to the 500 largest companies on the stock market. Now, before I go any further, I gotta make sure this is clear. Investing money has risks. You are never guaranteed to make money when you invest. You might even lose money, so always do your own due diligence and never blindly listen to a random guy on YouTube. Everything that I'm talking about today are just examples. I'm not telling you what to invest in, and I'm not telling you where you need to invest. I'm giving you examples of how these ETFs work and a couple ETF examples that way you understand where to look. But I want you to do your own research because there are a ton of ETFs out there, so you got to find what's right for you. So the thing that differentiates these two ETFs is one, who manages the ETFs, and then what this ETF actually invests in and how much. So this is a Vanguard ETF and this is a Spider ETF. What that means is Vanguard, the company, is the one that owns and manages this ETF, and Spider is the one that manages this. By the way, just so you know, Spider is spelled SPDR. Now, when we talk about what companies an ETF is invested in, you want to look a little bit deeper than just the companies, because what's going to happen is both of these ETFs are both going to be invested in the biggest 500 companies in the stock market, but one might be invested more in Microsoft than Apple, the other might be more invested in Tesla, and so they both give you exposure to the top 500 companies, and this is where you can do a little bit of research and see how much each ETF is invested into what. One of the easiest ways to do that is just to go to finance.yahoo.com, and then you can just enter in these two ticker symbols, and then you'll see, if you scroll down, you'll see some of the top companies that each of these ETFs are invested in. Or you can go onto the Vanguard website or the Spider website, and they'll show you which companies these ETFs are invested in and how much. That way you can get an idea of which companies you're getting exposure to. Another thing that you can pay attention to when we're comparing different ETFs is the expense ratio. The expense ratio, if you go to finance.yahoo.com, you'll see it there. You'll also see it on both of these websites. This is how much money you are paying to have your money managed by this ETF. So the advantage with an ETF, especially a low-cost ETF, is you're gonna pay way less money to have your money managed here than to have somebody physically managing your money with an actively managed portfolio. So these type of ETFs, these are passively managed, meaning they're managed by a computer. So all these ETFs are doing is they're giving exposure to the top 500 companies in the stock market. If one of the companies in these top 500 companies goes bankrupt or gets smaller, well then this ETF or this computer is just gonna kick out that company and it's gonna put in the next biggest company. That way your money is still being managed by the computer, but it's like an algorithm. It's gonna give you exposure to the 500 biggest companies. The expense ratio on both of these ETFs are very low. It's less than 0.1%, which means if you invest $10,000 into one of these ETFs, they're gonna charge you less than $10 a year to manage your money. But that expense ratio is definitely something you want to remember as you start comparing more and more ETFs, and as we go deeper in this video, because you're going to learn about different types of ETFs. And so if you're trying to compare different types of ETFs and see what's better for you, the expense ratio is something you should be paying attention to. The second type of ETF that you might want to consider is a total stock market ETF, kind of like VTI. So a total stock market ETF gives you exposure to the entire stock market. Previously, we talked about the S&P 500 index, which gives you exposure to the 500 biggest companies in the stock market. Something like VTI will give you exposure to the entire stock market with big companies, medium-sized companies, and small-sized companies. So now you're literally just investing your money in the stock market, and if the stock market goes up, your ETF should go up. If the stock market goes down, your ETF in general should go down. So now you're essentially giving yourself exposure to the entire broad market. This is another Vanguard ETF. And the thing you got to understand about this is if you don't know what sector to invest in or what industry to invest in or kind of a more generalized place to invest, then this might be a good place for you to invest because now you're just investing your money in the stock market and you're hoping that the stock market will go up. So if you believe in the United States economy, then you should be believing in the United States stock market, which means that in the long term, the United States stock market should go up. And if it does go up, well, then this ETF will give you exposure to that. The third type of ETF that you want to consider are high dividend yielding ETFs. So there's two ways that you can make money in the stock market. You can make money through appreciation, which is when you invest your money in a stock, you bought it for $100 a share, and then the price of the stock goes up to $200 a share, and then you sell. You just made $100 because the price of your stock went up. This is called appreciation. But the second way that you can make money in the stock market is through something called dividends. So at the end of the year, some companies have a lot of cash in their bank account. And when a company has a lot of cash in the bank, there's a few things that they can do with this money. They can save this money for emergencies, they can invest this money back into the company, or they can pay this money back to the investors. They can literally just give it back to you in a cash payment called a dividend. A good company should do all three. So a good mature company is going to save some money for emergencies. They're going to keep investing in their growth. They're going to hire more employees. They're going to open more offices. They're going to open more stores. And then they want to reward their investors, their shareholders, people like you for investing in and believing in the company. So this is where you have to understand what stage a company is in to be able to pay out a dividend. Because if we're talking about a small startup growth company, well, this company's goal is probably not going to be to reward their investors because their goal right now is to get as big as possible, as fast as possible. So what they're going to be doing is not saving their money. What they're going to be doing is not paying this money out to their investors. What they're going to be doing is taking all of their cash and more
And invest it. I bet that's what he finna say.
through debt and other investments, and they're going to be reinvesting it back into their company. They're going to want to get more users. They're going to want to get more customers. They're going to want to open more stores. So smaller startup companies are not going to be paying out dividends because they want to get as big as possible, as fast as possible, and every dollar that they have is going to be going right back into their company.
I hope y'all paying attention to this because this is what they need to be teaching in school. This is some good information, y'all.
But some companies, your more mature companies or larger companies, are going to have this extra cash pile because they're already very large. And at the end of the year, they're going to have a huge profit. And if they want to pay this money out to their investors, one way they can do that is through dividends. It's an actual cash payment that you get without even selling your stock. Now again, there's a couple ways that you can get exposure to these dividends. You can go out and you can individually invest in companies that are paying out high dividends, or you can invest in a dividend paying ETF. So if you invest in a company that's paying out a high dividend, well, now the pro is you'll be able to get a high dividend, and if you invest in a good company, the value of your company will go up. But now the risk is if this company starts to tank, if they are on the verge of bankruptcy, if they start losing money, well then they're going to be forced to cut their dividend and you can see their stock price crash. The advantage of an ETF now is now you don't have to worry about trying to find the perfect company again because the ETF is going to give you exposure to a whole bunch of different high dividend paying companies. And now if one company tanks or goes bankrupt, you'll be okay because you're getting exposure to a wide range of companies. The con here is you're not going to get the highest possible dividend because some companies are going to pay a higher dividend than others, and your returns are also going to be averaged out because some companies are not going to do well, but other companies are going to do great. So the goal with an ETF is not to get the best return possible, is to get a slow and steady, consistent return through the market. A couple examples of ETFs that are focused on paying you dividends are VYM and RDIV. Again, these two ETFs are in the business of trying to get you high dividends. This is where, again, you have to know what your goal is as an investor. I know I've talked about this at least 100 times on our YouTube channel, which is why if you haven't subscribed to our channel, make sure you do that. But this is where you got to know your goal, because if your goal is to see your investment portfolio grow as big as possible, then you don't want to be investing in these high dividend ETFs because these companies are now taking their money and paying it out to their investors instead of taking their money and reinvesting it back into their company. So what you want to do, if your goal is to see your portfolio grow as big as possible, as fast as possible, is not invest into these dividend paying companies. These ETFs are focused on producing you consistent cash flow. It's not going to be the highest cash flow possible, but their goal is to give you consistent cash flow that you can count on. Like what we saw happen in the 2020 pandemic was a lot of companies started to struggle. And because of that, lots of companies started pulling back their dividends. And so people who were invested into these companies that were paying out dividends, hoping for consistent cash flow, were then all of a sudden, almost overnight, left with no more cash flow coming in because lots of companies cut their dividends. And so the whole idea idea here is to get a safer, which also means lower return, but a safer, more consistent dividend income. If you enjoyed this clip and you
I did enjoy this. This was some good information, man. I need to tap in and, you know, look at some more of his videos, cause he telling y'all some good stuff, man. Let's get this money, y'all. Assets only, no liabilities.